Greetings and welcome to Bounce or Break Part 4. What we're going to do is add a power up to our game. This is going to continue on from Part 1, so if you haven't done Part 2 or 3, no worries. This is just adding a power up to the base game that we made. And this is what it's going to look like. So this spinning object in the middle will give us an extra ball to be able to shoot on the next round. So if I grab it, I now have a GUI display up here that gives me an indicator of how many balls I've got to shoot. And then when I click, it shoots them both, blows stuff up, grabs some extra power-ups, and now I've got even more that I can shoot. And that's the idea behind it. It's going to be taking the base game that we've got and really adding quite a bit to it and extensifying it. I don't think that's a word, but we're going to modify it so that you can use this and you'll understand how to add any kind of power-up that you want into your game by the end. I hope that sounds exciting. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing we're going to need is that sprite. So you can grab that down below or make your own. This is what it looks like right here. I'm going to go ahead and just drag it into GameMaker, put it in my sprites folder, and it's already named for us. So I'm just going to make sure that the origin is in the middle center. So this is what we're going to use, and we need it to be an object, and we're going to start by putting that object into our game, making it spin around so that we know that everything there works properly. So let's go ahead and right-click on Objects, create a new one. We're going to call this O Power Up, and assign that sprite to that right there. Now, we're going to need two events. We're going to need the step event and a collision with the ball. So I'm going to go ahead and add both of these events, and then we'll talk about them. So step and collision with the ball object. Now, the step event is going to be very simple with just one line of code. We're just going to rotate this around so that it has a little bit of life to it. The other event is just going to destroy it and then add that value, the adding an extra power-up ball, to the controller objects that we'll modify as we go further on. So that's all that this object has to handle, and then we have to set up a few physics properties as well. So let's handle those physics properties first by going into the physics, and we want this to be a density of 0 because it's going to stay there. And this one's going to be a little different because we don't actually want this to bounce off of it. I've played around with both bouncing off of it and moving through it, and the bouncing off really does some, it's kind of odd. Like, if the player doesn't expect it, it can really throw them off. So if you want to do that, then keep it almost the way it is now. Just set it up just like everything else in the point parent. But for a different way of accessing and interacting with a physics-based object, we're actually going to take start awake off and put this to just a sensor. So that way we can still hit it and interact it with the collision event, but we're not actually going to bounce off of it. So let's go ahead and put the code in for these two events. Following along with GML, look to your left, and if you're following along with visual, look to your right. So what we're going to do is just set our physics rotation, which is phi rotation, to be subtracted by 2 every single frame. Here, what we're going to do is destroy the power-up, but then add an extra ball to the controller's variable, which we're going to create shortly. And that's it. Like I said, not a lot of code. Now, just make sure that you've got uses physics checked. I forgot to do that before. Then we can go into our room, drag your power-up object right there in the center, and run it to test it out. And voila, a rotating physics object. Nothing too special there. And if you try to collide with it right now, it's actually going to crash the game, which is fine because we are attempting to modify a variable that doesn't exist. So yeah, we should have a problem. But it's doing what we want to do. So now we're going to jump over to the controller object. And we're going to do quite a bit of work here. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look at everything that we need to do. So right now, we've got 3 events. They are the step, the draw GUI, and the global left pressed. Before we go and modify anything, let's walk through the process of what we're going to do. So to begin, we first have to initialize some data in this object, right? We need to know how many extra balls to create, when we're going to make them, and all of that kind of stuff. Along with that, though, we're also going to have to set up a system where these balls actually shoot out at a fixed interval. Because of the way this power-up works, which you can totally change it once you finish this and want to do whatever you want to do, the way that we're going to code it right now, though, is you click once, and every ball you've got will shoot there. After a certain amount of time, each one fires, and then it fires again if there's another one. So that means that we've got to change our system from a single click to shooting to a single click that then fires as many as we have. So we're going to need to introduce some data to add, and we're going to have to move most of the code over from the global left pressed event into an alarm. And so there's going to be some moving around of code, which is a really good thing to be able to do. It's a great skill to be able to refactor, to be able to take code that you've got and put it somewhere else, modify it, and make it work for what you want to do. Because we almost never get it right the very first time. So this will be a great experience if you don't have a lot of refactoring under your belt. All right. So let's go ahead and add the create event. And inside of here, we're just going to create 4 variables. So let's go ahead and do that really quickly. So we're going to make our 4 variables. The first one here is going to be called create count, and we're going to set it to 1. The second variable is extra balls, and we'll set that to 0. And then we're going to create click X and click Y and set them to undefined to begin, because undefined means we haven't set them yet, which is exactly what we want. All right, we got that out of the way. And now let's jump over to the draw GUI event. This isn't where we're going to implement actually shooting more, but we do need to have some visual indicator for the player to understand how many extra balls they've got, because that will directly impact what they're going to do on that turn. And if we can draw that, then we can quickly set this up and test it by putting in a value of like, hey, we're starting with 3 extra balls to begin, and we can make sure that works, and then we can actually figure out the shooting. So over in the draw GUI, we've got this first set of code here, which is totally fine. We can keep that. What we need to do is actually go down a little bit, and we're going to draw how many extra balls we've got. But we don't know that we always have extra. So we're going to have to ask the question, hey, do we have any extra? And if we do, then we're going to draw them out. This is a super useful thing to be able to do, and we use it all the time when displaying information on the screen. So let's do it. So we just need to add code after what's already here. And the first thing we're going to say is if create count is more than 1, so if we need to make another ball, then we're going to draw text at this specific location, which is 400 and then 16. We're going to put some text in there so that the player understands what it is that they're looking at. And we're going to create a temporary variable called I and set it to 1. And we're going to use this to draw the extra balls on the screen, so it's pretty important. We're going to repeat this as many times as we have more balls to create -1. And then we're going to draw those extra balls as an icon on the screen using the draw sprite extended function. This function allows us to draw and control every single aspect about it. And so we have to fill in a lot of properties here. After we're done with that, we're going to increase that variable I by 1 and continue on. Okay, we have the display power now. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. We know that if the create count is more than 1, then we will draw something. So let's go back to our create event and just test it out. Let's do create count of 3. Run the game, and we should see on our game how many extra balls we've got, and there it is. So If they don't look exactly spaced out, then play around with some of the numbers. Okay, this is a trial and error thing. I figured out what worked, and that's what we put in. But if you've got a different UI, you've got a different place you want to put them, play around with the numbers. No harm there. Okay, that's the Draw GUI event. Pretty nice. Now comes the refactoring. So we want to click and shoot as many extra balls as we have. So we're going to go into the global left pressed event. And from here, we're actually going to take out or copy or cut, actually. We're going to cut most of the code out and put it inside of an alarm event. And what that means for this event is that all we want to do is capture the location of the mouse when we click. And then we'll know where we want to spawn the balls at, or where they're aiming towards, and then in the alarm, we'll shoot those off. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of this out, but again, we're going to put it in the alarm event with a little bit of modification. So I'm going to cut it so that it deletes it and copies it. Then we're going to add in just a little bit of code here. So this is where we can use that undefined value. And we're going to ask, is clickX undefined? And if it is, that means we need to capture the data. So we're going to save clickX and clickY, saving them with the values of mouse X and mouse Y respectively, and then set alarm 0 equal to 1. And there we go. The global left pressed event is now all set. What we've got to do is now add that alarm event. So if you get a little yellow warning here, that reference to non-existent event alarm 0, well, that's because we haven't added it. So let's go ahead and add it. Let's add that event alarm 0. There are 12 options, so make sure you go with 0 because that's the one that we have set so far. And the goal here is we're going to figure out where we clicked, because we already saved that information, so we have it. We're going to then create a ball, and if there are any extra balls to create, we'll reset the timer and go again. And what's really cool about the system is it works for 2 or up to unlimited, because the system just says, do we have any more to create? And if we do, then make more. And when we don't, we're done. So we would call this can scale, right? It doesn't matter how few or how much, and that is a great way to be able to code it, because if we just wanted to make it be able to shoot 2 or 3 or 4 extra, we could do that and it might be a little simpler, but we never know how much we're going to want to modify our game. So making it scalable really helps in that regard. So this event is the refactoring section, so we're going to have to move some stuff around. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in what we had before. And now what we're going to do is we're going to have to move some things around. And if you get any errors, this is probably where it will happen. So pay close attention. Make sure that you are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing here and following along. And if something comes out wonky, you can always download the finished project to compare your code to mine. All right, let's do it. So here's where this can be a little tricky, especially with visual. We've got to erase part of the code or move it around in this case and make sure that the order remains the same. So ensure that your lines line up exactly as you would expect here. Once we've done that, we are going to subtract from create account by 1, which is what the minus minus does. And then we're going to ask the question, is the create count greater than 0 still? Because if it is, we need to set that alarm 0 to 20 so that it will trigger again and fire another ball in just a few frames. Okay, we're done with that. It was a lot, but we got it. Now let's go ahead and test it out, because the bulk of the system is done now. So if we go into our game and I shoot and I move my mouse, it still creates those 3 balls just like we would expect. However, we get a really weird thing happening where we've suddenly lost the game. And that happens because right now, that ball, when it goes outside of the room, it moves all of the point objects up, just like it was doing before. but it doesn't understand that now there's several of them. There's quite a few, and so we only want to move up the point objects on the very last ball to leave the room. So that's what we've got to do next. So let's close the game, and we're going to go and open the O ball object, and here is the code for what happens when it leaves the room. So again, we're going to do some refactoring because we still want to do most of the stuff inside of here, but we also have to check if it's the last ball to leave. And if it's not, then we're not going to do anything else because we don't want to make 5 new objects and move them all up at the same time. That's going to cause a lot of issues. So let's do a little more refactoring. Once again, we need to do some refactoring. So in this case, we are going to wrap all of the code we already have in an if statement. So make sure that when you drag things over in visual, they are lined up exactly how they should be. And in code, then you can just add brackets to the top and bottom of the sections that you want. In this case, we're asking the question, is this the last ball, with the code if instance number, passing in the ball object, and asking, is it equal to 1? Is there only one ball object left? If there is, then we're going to run everything as normal, but reset all of those variables that we created before. We're going to set click X from OController back to undefined. We're going to add 1 to the create count of OController. Then we're going to add to the create count once more, however many power-ups we got, which is that extra balls variable. And finally, we set the extra balls variable back to 0. That way we're not starting with any extra power-ups that we shouldn't have to begin with. And make sure that it's all wrapped up and set accordingly, and you'll be good to go. All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and test this out. Because with the power-up, it's actually working and we're pretty much done. So we can shoot, everything works there, and they only move up when they're supposed to. We can collect the power-up, although I collected it too late. So let's try shooting here, and collect it. It adds another one, and it does exactly what we would expect it to do. Awesome. So the last thing to do is actually put the power-up inside of the point objects themselves. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go over to the point parent object, and in here we're basically going to just randomly choose a % of the point objects to, when they die, to spawn a power-up. And if you add any other power-ups, you can put them in here as well, which is the really cool thing. So we're going to go into the create event and the collision with the ball event. And in here, the create event, what we're going to do is just randomly choose a % of them to spawn a power-up when they die. And we're going to just choose a number, and we can set that number to whatever % we want. So let's do it. So we're going to create a variable called extra balls and set it to false. And what this is saying is, should we add the power-up to this object? We're going to start by setting it to false. Then we're going to choose a random number between 0 and 2. And if it is 0, then we actually are going to set that extra ball variable to true, which we'll then use to create that power-up when this point object dies. Voila. In this case, we're setting it to about a 30% chance, but you can do whatever percentage feels good for your game, and you could change it as they get further into the game if you want to do something like that. Now, let's go over to the collision with the ball event, and the very last thing that we got to do is simply spawn that power-up when this ball dies if it's supposed to. If not, we just ignore it. And with that, this is the last thing we got to do. So let's do it. And this is the last thing we got to do. Make sure that you're putting your code where it's supposed to be inside of here. It needs to be when points is less than or equal to 0. And we're going to ask the question, should I make an extra ball? If extra ball is true, then go ahead and create that power-up right where we died at. And voila. Let's run the game and test it out. Make sure we didn't make any bugs for what we're doing. So we start with 3 balls right away. I collected them here. I collected several there. Wow. Now I've got 5 balls to shoot and I'm out. So each object can make one. It's got about a 30% chance. And that's pretty cool. We've got power-ups in our game. And I could keep playing here to try to find them, but ooh, it might take a little while here because now they're kind of harder to kill. But that's it. That's adding a power-up to a game, and any kind of crazy power-up you can imagine, you can add through a system like this. Along the way, you've learned really incredible stuff like refactoring, how to use for loops to draw information on the screen, and how to create a scalable system. So I hope you take those skills and use them in your game. I'd love to hear what you're working on and what you thought of this entire series. Leave a comment below or reach out to me wherever you can find me. So thanks for joining me, and as always, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later.